Hey people, I've just watched an interview, or at least part of an interview, between Krishnan and Murphy, who's anchorman, semi-anchorman on Channel 4 News here in the UK, and Quentin Tarantino, the film director. And that interview's making a few headlines because it got quite heated. It turned into, Tarantino got quite irked off by some of the questions that were being asked because Krishnan and Murphy was going down the line of asking if there is a relation between real life violence being influenced from violent films. And of course, Quentin Tarantino's films are known for being pretty generous with the red crimson, so to speak. Okay, first of all, my own stance on this position is I am 90% sure that it's not quite fair to blame films or video games. Well, to a lesser extent, video games. I mean, I think they're more culpable. But anyway, I do think films, especially, it's difficult to blame a violent film on actual violence. If someone is so weak-willed that they're going to be influenced by that film to go out and commit a crime, then the issue there is more to do with mental health than a piece of art. And it's true that some films are violent for the sake of it, but I think it's difficult to sort of link. I mean, the NRA is trying to do this week, and they should. Well, people know my views on the gun issue by now, so I think that's hypocritical, given that they actively promote firearms. It's just pathetically ridiculous. The whole business about do films influence violence, I don't think they do in the vast majority of cases. Now, I watched Trainspotting last night, a famous drug film from the UK in 1996. There's bits in that film which are very violent. The character Bigby, played by Robert Carlyle, is a psychopath who starts fights for no reason. There's one scene where he glasses a man in the jaw. The film includes a lot of sort of pumped up music, and it's a good film. I like the film. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and imitate Bigby, because I have the common sense to see that his character is a scumbag. And I think most people watching the film would see that. They would see the gist of what is going on. And that applies to most films. However, having said all that, that's my own stance. I think it's unfair in the vast majority of cases to blame art on real life violence. Having said that, I disagree with those who think that there isn't a conversation to be had. I think the issue is more to do with mental health and seeing how certain people react to violence on screen and then feel the need to go out and copy it. The same also applies for music and video games. I think more so in the case of music and video games. Recently, I believe there was a scheme in the UK whereby nightclubs would be encouraged to play more tranquil music towards the end, sort of a slow love song or something like that, so as clubbers would be, their sentiments would be eased. Therefore, if people have had a lot to drink, a slow moving song at the end, the argument would ease their tensions and be less likely to result in a fight, because a lot of violence around nightlife occurs at the beginning and the end, not always in the middle. I'm not sure how successful that scheme was and what the correlation was, but in the case of violent video games, I don't agree that they're completely uninfluential in people's behaviour. There is studies that have been showing that it is possible to get addicted to internet games, and there have been problems where people have, especially young people, have responded with extreme violence, for example when a long-running video session has been interrupted or something like that. Now that's, the vast majority of gamers wouldn't sort of, they differentiate between violence on the screen and, and I've played plenty of shoot 'em up games, I've played plenty of violent games, and I find them quite entertaining, to be quite honest. But there's a difference between that and the real life situation, and it is important to recognise that. But I think it's naive to suggest that there's no influence whatsoever. There are some video games I think there should be censorship on. Now, for example, there was a video game recently, part of it I believe was set in Manchester Cathedral, and it involved shooting people up and so on. And this came shortly after a knifing in the vicinity, or so there are circumstances where I think people have a right to question violence in art. I really do. Um, and I think it's a bit naive to say that there's absolutely no influence, because clearly some people will be influenced. But having said that, in the end of the day, fiction is fiction. So if you have a presentation of violence on screen, I do back up certificates. I do think that's a fair policy to have certificates on violent films and so on. But I think it's difficult to blame directors directly for violence. But it would also be wrong to say that they are doing anything positive to reduce violence. It's blatantly they aren't. So it's somewhere in the middle. They're not responsible for the violence, but they're not doing much to help it either. And the argument that we're just portraying, and this is a problem I have with rap. The argument with rap always goes, we aren't glorifying violence, we're just talking about it. But let's be honest here. A lot of rap songs glorify violence against women, glorify homophobic violence. That's just a fact. You can't deny that fact. And that's one of the reasons I really don't like that genre of music. Now, you might call me whatever you want. You might say there's no responsibility. I strongly disagree. In Jamaica, where there's a big R&B culture, homophobia is very high. And attacks on gay people are very high. And I do believe there's a correlation there. The sort of attitudes presented in R&B culture. Now, to be fair, there's people within the industry that have spoken out against this. But it happens. So I disagree with the idea that art, whether that be films, music or video games, has no influence whatsoever, or cannot be responsible for influencing people's mentality. I mean, there are plenty of examples, for example, of politically motivated films, songs, which have definitely influenced people. Like in the 80s, there were plenty of white power sort of songs around. As you can't tell me they didn't influence people, I think that's naive. Having said that, there is a big difference between, I think the majority of people can see the difference. Anyway, back to this interview. So that, I just want to present my own stance on the issue, which is that I don't think you can blame directors directly. But having said that, I do think Quentin Tarantino was being a bit of a arrogant diva in this interview. Krishnan Murphy works for a serious news program, and he was asking a legitimate question. Even if you disagree with the insinuation that violence is caused by violent films, that doesn't mean people don't have a right to discuss the issue. It doesn't mean there should be this blacklist on discussing it, which is what Tarantino seems to be suggesting. And he was like, I'm shutting you down, man. You know, I'm not your slave, etc., etc. No one was suggesting that he was. If he could have diffused the situation by saying, look, no, I don't think there is a correlation, and I reject your insinuation, something like that. But the fact he just point blank refused to answer it, in my view, doesn't help his case. And you know, to accuse Christian Murphy of trying to make him a slave, that's I think it's a classic case of film directors. They're a bit like top chefs, in my opinion. Not all of them, but they are very arrogant people. And I think it's because, you know, to make a film takes a lot of hard work. Around that, they get this sort of dictatorial mindset sometimes, and they do think they're above criticism. That's the same with top chefs. So then when someone does actually put them on the spot, Tarantino is showing that there's this sort of prima donna arrogant attitude, like, oh wow, you cannot question me, and it's just very arrogant. And I've seen the same could be said of football managers and top chefs. Some of them, I shouldn't generalize it, I'm not talking about everyone here. I mean, Ron Howard isn't like that, the director, he's not that arrogant, but a lot of film directors I think are. And you know, most of the time Quentin Tarantino is going to be dealing with sycophantic tabloid journalists who are just going to agree with everything he says. And here you have a serious journalist asking a serious question Tarantino doesn't like it. That's what it comes down to. And I know he said, oh, I've answered this question many times before, but it's, you know, he's in a position of responsibility. And like I say, I don't think that violent films are responsible for street violence. I really, really don't. So before you accuse me of being sort of a Mary Whitehouse type Puritan, I'm really not like that. I watch violent films. I listen to occasionally violent songs, explicit songs. So I'm not saying that for a second. But what I am saying is that doesn't mean there isn't a valid debate to be had. It doesn't mean there isn't an opposing view which deserves to be heard. That's my stance on that. Okay, thanks for watching.